If your BMW has a rough idle, it could be due to a vacuum leak from a worn out eccentric shaft sensor gasket. In today's video, we'll be showing you how to replace this gasket to get you back on the road in no time. So to access the eccentric shaft sensor gasket, we'll have to remove the engine cover. And this will be held on by three 10mm bolts, two of them being here at the front. And now to access the final bolt in the rear, we'll have to remove the entire cabin air filter cowling and all the plastic covers that are in the way. First, we'll pull off the wiring harness box right here on the top by simply pulling it outwards and releasing all three of the tension clips. And from here, we'll disconnect the electrical connector to the ambient temperature sensor on the passenger side of the cowling, and then disconnect the electrical connector on the driver's side to the hood sensor. And now from here, we'll simply release the ECU cover by pulling upwards on the two retention clips, and then you'll see that you'll have one right here, and if we turn this cover around on the other side, we'll have another. Simply pop these out of place and you can lift this cover up. And then we'll do the same exact thing for the driver's side and pull up on those two retention clips so we can pull the cover off of our brake master cylinder. And from here, we'll have one 8mm screw holding the cowling into the engine bay. And from there, we can release any of the rubber grommets that are connected to the cowling. And since we actually did the cabin air filter delete kit on our E92, the air filters are going to look quite a bit different, but still go ahead and remove the four 8mm screws that are holding the cabin air filters into place. And from there, we can simply remove the cabin air filter cowling from the engine bay so we get access to that final bolt on the engine cover. Perfect. And now you can see the third and final engine cover bolt in the rear. And once that's removed, you can simply carefully remove the engine cover from the engine bay, ensuring that you don't scratch or damage any of the surrounding components. And so I've had a bunch of erratic idling issues on my BMW, and I've even had the car turn off on me a few times at red lights. So I immediately went straight to the valve cover because this is actually a common issue when you start to accumulate vacuum leaks. And so to troubleshoot my vacuum leak, I went all along the perimeter of the valve cover looking for anything that stood out as a red flag. So then I traced to the rear of the valve cover where you can see the crank ventilation that's actually built into these valve covers. And I didn't see any smoke coming out of it, any cracks, or anything that could indicate an issue with the ventilation system. And so now coming above that, another very common issue is the crankcase breather hose that connects to the valve cover and traces all the way down to the intake manifold. This part very commonly goes bad because underneath the protective thick foam you see on the top, the hose itself is actually very brittle and starts to crack underneath. And although the hose looks to be in perfect condition, it actually could be giving you a vacuum leak and cause you a world of headache. But I've actually replaced this hose pretty recently, so I don't think it's the issue. And so as I started to look around the perimeter of the valve cover, I did start to notice a large amount of oil buildup on the front near the top of the engine. So I thought, well, let's check inside of the ignition coils and see if there's any oil buildup on the spark plugs. And as I started to lift everything up, I noticed, nope, it's perfectly fine. So if I did have oil inside of here, it would indicate maybe the valve cover gasket is starting to fail, but everything looks perfectly dry. So putting all this information together and tracing the oil upward, I noticed what the problem could be. The eccentric shaft sensor gasket located right here is most likely leaking oil downwards, and it's tracing down to look like a bad valve cover, but in reality, it's the eccentric shaft sensor gasket. And so this gasket here is essentially supposed to stop oil from seeping inside of the sensor, which is actually located underneath the valve cover, and it also keeps a tight vacuum to the top half of the engine. And a very common issue is, like I said, oil's going to build up inside the sensor, it's going to fry it, and then oil will get inside of the connector as well, which could cause even more issues because you're not going to get a good electrical contact or signal. And so to remove this gasket, it's actually very simple. All we're going to need is a small flathead screwdriver, and we can simply wedge it underneath the actual metal portion of the sensor gasket. So you'll see this little star pattern design. This indicates to you where the metal or hard plastic parts are. That'll give you good leverage to actually lift up this gasket. So what we're going to do is grab a hammer and simply tap a flathead screwdriver all along the perimeter so we can simply wedge it up bit by bit. And after that gasket starts to lift up, we can get a larger flathead screwdriver and lift up on this gasket and then gently start to wedge it up without damaging the sensor itself. And just like that, we can lift up the old worn out eccentric shaft sensor gasket and remove it from our valve cover. And this gasket very commonly goes bad because the hard plastic material turns brittle and allows for cracks and vacuum leaks, but as well the inside diaphragm is made out of a soft rubber material that also gets micro tears, which will cause more vacuum leaks and rough idling. So even though the gasket looks to be in decent condition, in reality it might have micro tears inside of the rubber diaphragm, which is what's giving us our rough idle. And after removing it, we can clearly see we have oil buildup all along where the gasket sat, and we can even see a little bit of it pooling up right here, which reaffirms the fact that oil was pooling up here and dripping down, which is causing all of that residual oil buildup. And so what we're going to do is now clean off the entire mating surface with a microfiber towel. That way our new gasket can sit into place firmly, and we can also spot any oil leaks in the future very easily. And that looks much better and should give us a clean, firm fit to our new gasket. And now here we have the new gasket on the left side by side with the old one. And as you can see, what happens is as the rubber starts to age, it starts to peel back, making the hole much larger, which is allowing even more air to go through. You can see again on the left, it almost looks like a completely different part number because the rubber looks much thicker and the hole looks much smaller. That's because it's never been installed before, so the soft rubber diaphragm inside of it is not as loose. And now reinstalling this is very simple. We're simply going to slip the new gasket on into place. Just be careful you don't nick or crack the plastic tabs on the actual sensor. So we're going to overlap it carefully on the top here and then overlap it again carefully on the bottom. And now from here, go in a circular motion and press down very firmly all along the perimeter. You will need to put a good amount of force onto the actual gasket. Now what you can do is tap it into place gently. Just don't use a metal hammer. Use like a rubber mallet or some sort of similar tool, but we essentially want to tap or apply pressure all along the entire perimeter until every bit of it is completely flush and there's no gaps that air could escape from. But this looks perfect. It looks brand new. So now we can go ahead and reinstall our electrical connector. First things first, before you reinstall the connector, make sure you give it a good visual inspection to make sure there's no oil buildup inside of it that could end up frying the sensor or making for a bad electrical contact. But ours looks to be in good shape, so we can simply press it down into place firmly until it fully latches on. And from here, we can go ahead and test start the vehicle to make sure everything's running perfectly fine. And as you can see, the idle is perfectly steady now. There's no rough idle, there's no vacuum leaks, and that's because the old eccentric shaft sensor was worn out and letting air escape. But that is how you remove and replace your old worn out eccentric shaft sensor gasket to stop vacuum leaks and rough idling. That way you don't have to pull off and replace the entire valve cover, because in our case it wasn't needed. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button to take advantage of more helpful BMW videos like this one that'll help you save time and money.